First up is Violent Night, and I don't know if I did myself a favor or a disservice by not watching the trailer going into this film. I generally try to avoid trailers, but I may have missed an important part of the premise, which it was, I guess, a fun surprise, or at least added an air of mystery to a film that does not have a lot of mystery to it. I had just seen a bunch of billboards of David Harbour dressed as Santa Claus, and it seemed camp and hammer horror or gore-y, I don't know, which are not my normal genres of choice, but one, it's the only major release coming out this week, and two, sometimes these things can be fun subversions of, you know, the genuine sacchariness of the types of films that come out around this time of year. So, hey, went to see Violent Night. This is one of those times I'm going to recommend you watch the trailer in advance. This is the tiniest of spoiler alerts if you have not seen the trailer. I did not realize that the concept behind this movie is that David Harbour's actual Santa Claus, like magical Santa Claus with reindeer and powers and all that stuff. And so I went into it for the first however long thinking like, what's the gimmick? What's the reveal? What's the, like, what we're going to find out he was like a former special ops agent or whatever it is. Nope. I was very off in that territory. So this film is about if a Santa Claus or the Santa Claus got trapped in some sort of weird high-stakes hostage, blackmail, bribery, violent situation, and how he would react in that. There is a young child in peril, which is why he involves himself, because otherwise I think he would probably just be like, you're adults, figure it out. So the movie is just a bunch of violence. As promised by the name, it does live up to that. I went to a screening where people were aggressively into it, and I think if you think you'll like this movie, you'll like this movie. And if you are off-put by the trailer, you're going to hate this movie because it's not for you. It is very transparent about, you know, what it is setting out to be. And I do think, to its credit, it accomplishes the goal of wanting to be just a series of violent acts strung together. I think the saving grace of it is, one, David Harbour as Santa Claus. I thought he actually, you know, he's very personable. He gives a warmth that I think in somebody else's hands, it would have come off as disingenuous, but also in a like, we're not in on the joke, or, we're too cool for school way. I think that is a possibility. It also stars John Leguizamo, Edie Patterson, Gigandet, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Alex Hassell, Alexis Louder, and Beverly D'Angelo. And it's a violence fest. Like, if that's what you're into, which, you know, all right, it's a Christmas themed violence fest. It's nothing more and it's nothing less, except for with a tiny, tiny bit of like genuineness and commitment to the role from David Harbour. And also, I should give a shout out because child actors can be hit and miss. And the girl, her name is Leah Brady. She plays the young girl in peril, the daughter of his family. I thought she did a fine job. You know, I think she's a pleasant stand-in for the Macaulay Culkin-esque character. Although people keep pegging this as like violent Home Alone or Die Hard meets, you know, some of these things. I guess it's, you know, any movie that involves a Christmas theme. It is a little bit Home Alone-y in that this is just a bunch of series of gags that are I mean, it feels like they pitched this in order to enable just a bunch of series of gags that they had planned, and they're like, I guess we could throw a plot over it. But really, what would happen if, you know, this horrible violent thing happened and this horrible violent thing happened? You know, what are the transitions between those? Less important. But she does a fine job. David Harbour does a fine job. Like I said, if you like the trailer, you're going to enjoy the movie. And if you don't like the trailer, you're not going to enjoy the movie. Because I had not seen the trailer, I had a very odd experience, but I do think the enthusiasm of the crowd I was with did buoy me a little bit, because I was like, oh, okay, like it's meeting its mark. So I'm going to give Violent Night a 3.2 out of 5. The other film I have this week is called Hunt. It is the directorial debut of Jung-jae, who you probably know from Squid Game. He also stars in it, and just for a little Squid Game reunion, it's also got Sung-tae, who plays the sort of mafioso, longer-haired, tattooed man. It also stars Jung Woo-sung and Hye-jin. Okay. So it's a spy thriller, and it takes place in the 80s, and I think this is going to be tough. So I'm very pro watching films in languages other than my own native language. I don't have a problem with that. I feel I'm relatively good at paying attention to them. The challenge with this film is that, so it sets itself up in a sort of fictionalized political world that is very similar to ours, but it's centering around, you know, a not real operation. As far as I know, it's not based on history. That was not clear, but it seems very fictionalized. It takes place in the 80s, and it centers around, one, the ongoing strife between North and South Korea. There are other political players involved, but two, it looks at this sort of internal two groups. One is focused on the domestic side of, again, South Korea, and the other is focused on the like international side of essentially like the KCIA. I don't actually know if that's a real thing or if they've just ported that over. They keep referring to like the JCIA and the KCIA. So I guess, yeah, Central Intelligence Agencies would be, an international thing, but why would they refer to themselves as, add the country of it to their own thing? Anyway, I found that odd, but it could just be a me thing. So the problem is that it's one of those, okay, you don't know who you can trust, who's on whose side. They're all investigating each other while also trying to, unwrap this larger plot. But the problem is, like, I don't care because their affiliations or what they're sort of leading to as hints change every 2 minutes. And I know the idea is to keep you on your toes and be like, ooh, are they the traitor? It's about a hunt for a mole. I should say that. And it's like, okay, are they the traitor? But when every twist and turn, there's too many twists and turns and you get whiplash. I think that's the big problem, right? Where I didn't feel a sense of, ooh, maybe I am starting to suspect this person naturally, because they're having you suspect everyone, but they're giving so much credibility to those moments that at a certain point you're just like, I'm going to zone out on this because you're either all the traitor or not the traitor or whatever it is, and you're all bad. Your interrogation methods are terrible. This is ironically sometimes felt as Violent Night. Violent Night delights a little more in the gore of these things. This is just a lot of action scenes and then very intense screaming at each other scenes, and something about it did not connect for me. I think if they had taken a couple passes at the plot and just like slimmed it down more and focused on this relationship between these two heads of the domestic and international divisions of South Korean KCIA and their lack of trust in each other, there are moments where they talk about like the backstory between them, all these things, and there's too much happening. And I feel like possibly because it is a directorial debut, they were just like, we got to get all these things in here. More is more, but more is not always more. So from an acting standpoint, I think it's fine. Again, it's a very macho man, masculine, not macho man, but it's one of those movies where this is true of most modern made action thrillers where, of course, the men are all like, just superhero trained soldiers and invincible and have the best shot, like aim ever and all those things. There's just an unwillingness to have fallibility. So there's a lot of like, gunfights and street chases and stuff like that. And it just gets to be a little much. And again, also it's like, well, but also the body count in this is very high. It's very strange. So do I recommend Hunt is a great question that I've been asking myself since I watched it. Not really, I think, sadly, is the answer. And I really want to support this. Also, they're doing a period piece. It's set in the 80s, but it doesn't feel that way. There's certainly some visual elements in terms of the cars they drive, but the clothing they wear doesn't feel very 80s. I mean, maybe Korea in the 80s was much more fashion forward than the Americas were, but, it just feels like everything's very tailored and modern. The look of the film feels very modern. I don't feel like there's any sort of not inhibition, but just like challenges of the lack of technology in the 80s. Everything feels very instantaneous, which would have been actually like a great thing to add this to the suspense is like having to wait for information because that's what happened at the time. Not even if you were the world's most cutting edge spy group, like you're not going to get access to all these things so quickly. Everyone is too proficient and good, and therefore it's like too evenly matched, and you just there's no sense of investment for me as an audience member at a certain point. So if this is super your jam and you love a spy thriller and it doesn't matter what the stakes are and any of that stuff and you don't really need to care about the characters, like go ahead and watch this. But otherwise I found it kind of to be a bit, I don't even know if it's disappointing because I was like, oh, a debut especially when you were moving from one type of creative role to another, I don't always have the highest expectations. I think somebody like, I don't know, John Krasinski did a great job of it, but I think I didn't get a sense of who he was as a storyteller unless who he is as a storyteller is super frenetic. So I'm only going to give it 2.9 out of 5.